Okay, Chapman. So let's maybe back it all the way up to what this news really means. Like, first of all, what is it exactly? Like, what happened? What did Canada do? Who's angry? Who's not angry? What is going on, Chapman?
Well, as far as who's angry and who's not angry, I can't answer that question just yet. Um, I have basically formulated a series of events that happens to fit the facts of the situation. But what appears to have happened is that a ship that this is the Atlantic Navigator 2, I believe, that carries enriched uranium product, which would be uranium that is been enriched to reactor grade fuel. So that would be like 4% around there. Was refused, the ship in question refused to take on that cargo. And they've then departed St. Petersburg, and they're headed now to Veracruz, and then they will go to, I believe, Houston.
Without that, that uranium is not on board right now.
No, it is not.
And that is
Based
because
on the information that we know now, it is not on
okay.
board.
And that is because it would violate certain Canadian laws. So this means that
Yes.
while we sit around and talk on Twitter, wait for a ban on Russian uranium, that's pretty much already happened. But that's your Russian uranium fuel based on what you wrote, right? That's not yellow cake, or could
potentially it would potentially include uranium as well.
But you're not 100% clear on that.
Because there is also mining activities that are excluded in this as well. There was a whole series of things that are potentially now banned. Essentially, it was a laundry list. None of it really specifically says nuclear enrichment or uranium in the. You have to dig into the definitions, the ISIC definitions, and the product classification codes definitions as well. And that involves some research. So basically this, it was like broad topics like forestry products, metals, all sorts of things that it would not seem apparent right away that this had banned Russian enrichment. What specifically it appears to have banned is wholesaling services, commodity brokers who trade on behalf of others, and others who trade on other wholesalers who trade on behalf of others for fuels, metals, ores, timbers, building materials, a whole bunch of stuff. So then you have to go into the expanded definitions of like what is a building material, what is an ore, what is a fuel. And then you find, oh, yes, uranium is included in that.
But now we're talking about, so the ban is that Canada is not allowed to take any position of anything that comes out of Russia that falls within that list.
Any Canadian company.
But Americans can do that, for as far as we know.
But
so who's brokering this deal? Because if it's Centrus, that's an American company.
It's most likely Centrus, but they're using an American ship, or they're using a Canadian ship.
That's weird, isn't it?
They can't. It's just who owns it. Or it could also be that this uranium could have come from Canada. That's another thing that could have potentially happened. And
you mean it was mined in Canada and it went to Russia to get enriched or something like that?
Yeah, potentially, sure.
But then that would not have happened in the first place, based on the law.
Well, this mined ore that was shipped to Canada or shipped to Russia would have happened months, potentially even years ago.
Okay, cool. Yeah, cool. Okay.
So,
yeah. But could the U.S. or Centrus just hire a U.S. ship or a Bermudan ship or whatever and go get that uranium nonetheless?
Yes, they could. So it does pose a challenge in that you would have to be using ships that are certified to carry this material, and finding out who is kind of difficult. because piracy in the world still exists, and maybe these ships that are carrying enriched uranium don't necessarily want to advertise that they're carrying enriched uranium. As well as, those ships that they would find would not necessarily run this route. This route, like the Atlantic Navigator 2, this was actually the ship that delivered the last megatons to megawatts program, HEU, which was then downblended, back in 2012. That's interesting. So these ships have been doing this for a very long time. If you go to the shipping company's website, you will find that they run this route consistently. This is what they do. They go to St. Petersburg, then they go to either Philadelphia or I think it's Philadelphia, one other port here and there. I can look at the schedule here real quick. They go to St. Petersburg, Baltimore, Philadelphia. That's one ship that runs that round. Then there's one that goes from St. Petersburg to Veracruz to Houston, and they run that route. And that's how their fleet is divided up. So they have, I think, 4 ships that do this, and they are the ships that are certified to carry this cargo. So because there's extra safety features, that have to go into that, precautions, just because, But anyway, so so finding another ship, what I'm trying to say, that runs that route is also going to be a supply disruption as well. So that's going to be that is a challenge. Effectively speaking, this is a uranium ban, because any uranium that comes out of Canada, my opinion, this is the way I'm reading it, any Canadian activity that has to do with uranium, and Cameco has their tentacles everywhere. The Saskatchewan uranium empire, as I like to call them. Maybe the Saskatchewan uranium empire. Anyway, they have their tentacles everywhere, so they can't touch anything that has anything to do with Russian enrichment or Russian businesses, Russian nationals, anybody. They would be in violation of Canadian law.
But so is all this telling you that, what we previously talked about actually last time, that the enrichment issues that the US is alleged to be having, do you think this is adding oil to the fire, or how should I look at this?
Yes, absolutely. This definitely creates a bit of a fire under DOE's butt. Interestingly enough, on the very same day that this amendment to this law was enacted, put into effect, we hear Bloomberg breaks the story that DOE is going to ask Congress for $4.3 billion for enrichment. Very same day. So that's a bit of a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences. So that tells me that DOE might have been a little bit forewarned. They knew this was coming, and potentially they asked the Canadians to kind of be quiet about it, because DOE would want to remain in control of the process, and they would want time for Congress not to be like panicking, for utilities not necessarily to be panicking, because this seems to have caught everyone off guard. I appear to be the person that actually figured this out. So yay me. Very happy about that. Quite proud of myself. So, because nobody, it seems, knew about this. This kind of just all,
And you mean the already existing ban on uranium?
This just was a surprise to everyone. This was not known.
If we knew, this would also kind of tie into the thing that we were previously talking about, that the US is looking to downblend some of its highly enriched uranium.
Oh yes,
that was it was suggested by some people that like, for example, Art Hyde, who I respect and I've read a lot from, that it will not go into low enriched uranium.
No, it's going to low enriched uranium. Absolutely, 100%. I am very confident.
When you say 100%, you're 100% sure But is 100% of it going to go to low enriched uranium? So all of it.
They're not going to take the full stockpile, but they're going to have some of this, and they're going to have to downblend this to LEU. We don't have a choice.
Okay.
Because simply put, there's not enough uranium that we could begin overfeeding with. And yeah, they don't have a choice. This is 100%. Like this is a Charlie Foxtrot kind of situation, actually.
What are some of the numbers there, though? Because you're talking about overfeeding that creates an extra demand. So we go from underfeeding to overfeeding that creates extra demand for U3O8. What is the size of that relative to the size of supply that we're going to get from the downblending? Does that make sense? Like, how do those two outmatch each other?
It's best to answer this question, I think, by laying the groundwork with some knowledge of where everything is in the world in terms of this process, this fuel cycle process. In the OECD, and I include Brazil and a couple of other nations in that, we generate about 75% of the nuclear generation, but we only have about 40% of the SWU capacity. So all of a sudden, if you are cutting off Russian SWU, where the majority of it is, and also China, but China kind of does their own thing, you have a problem. Now, we have heard that we can overfeed the SWU capacity that we have, but that would require an amount of uranium based on, again, let me disclaim this and say I'm an idiot with a SWU calculator, that I'm just messing around. I don't have a background in this. I'm not an engineer. I'm just an accountant, and I can punch some numbers. You get to, for just the OECD, for our reactors, you would have to have the effect of your feed that you would put into your enrichment process would have to equal the amount of uranium that we have not mined annually since 1980.
When you say we, do you mean we the world?
The world.
We the
yes,
US?
We the world. So
okay.
Never mind Russia, never mind China, never mind India, their needs for fuel. Just talking about us. So if there was not a bull thesis before, which I've always questioned a little bit, just because you can kind of mess around with a SWU calculator, and you can make up the fall, or you can make up the demand that you're going to end up having for enriched uranium product by just adding a bit more. Like you add like 15 million SWU, and that actually cuts down your needs by quite a bit. So that you have a bull thesis now. Like you actually have there's the amount of uranium that's going to have to be used is staggering for overfeeding. There's a reason why we haven't done it for so long.
But how much more is that? I thought that was just about. I thought it wasn't too big of a number. Something like 25 million pounds, like about 10%.
Well, it might be best if I can break this down into the effects of SWU real quick. So if you need about 1 million pounds of fuel, thereabout, and you have 5 million SWU capacity, you have a certain demand. You figure that out. But if you add another 2.5 million SWU, your annual uranium demand is lowered by 12.5 million pounds a year. Over 10 years, that's 120 million pounds. We're now getting into like the billions of dollars worth of uranium U3O8. So this is where the effects that SWU can have on demand are huge. Something that really needs to be understood by investors in this space, because utilities understand it. So how does this affect utilities? Well, utilities, in my humble opinion, are not going to be contracting for more new U3O8 until they know how much SWU is going to be available to them. because like I said, with that 12 million figure, like I just said, that has huge effects on how much uranium they need to contract for. Not only like how little, but also, how much. So you get in trouble if you get on the wrong side of that. If you end up ordering too little, well, I mean, then you have a problem, obviously. If you end up ordering too much, well, then you've paid a whole bunch of money for something that you don't need. And that
So
can actually...
this sounds to me like there used to be a potential bear thesis of what if next gen comes online, ramps up production? What if Kazakhstan swamps the market with
Again.
cheap pounds again?
Or
right?
Uzbekistan,
What if they
something
do
like
that? But this sounds to me like, what if somebody swaps the market with SWU capacity?
Sure.
Is that doable? How long does it take? Is it hard to do it? Could it happen? Will it happen?
I mean, if you're okay, well, the most pressing example we have in the West would be Urenco. I think it took them about, from the start of construction, probably it took them about 4 years before, 3 or 4 years before they were in full production.
For how much?
And then their initial was about, I think it was under 3 million, but they eventually ended up at about 4.5 or 4.7 million SWU. And you can probably do that in about 4 years. If you have all the permits and all the licenses. Licensing probably takes 2 years. So where, let's say if you're Silex, for instance, how long does it take them to build out their SWU capacity?
Well, they're saying 2030, and I'm guessing that utilities are gonna need uranium before that, which might cause them to be panicking, which might cause them to pay whatever price to whoever can deliver. Or am I being a bit too hopeful? That's
probably going to be true. There's going to be there is limits on the SWU capacity. That's why we have seen spot SWU go up very quietly, and everyone is sort of wondering like, okay, what does this mean? Well, you've cut off Russian enrichment either through, this might have been before June 7th, so it might have been self-sanctioning. But that spot SWU, which is basically just extra capacity that they have lying around, that price shot up real quick.
That shot up because there's no more of it, right? So just as Mike Alkin explained on that recent uranium, whatever, what do you call it, conference?
Fireside chat, cloud fire.
Yeah, it was good. It was a good, definitely good talk. But so what he explained, the biggest takeaway for me was that we're now out of the spot market. The spot market is irrelevant. We don't watch the spot market. We should not care about the spot market because there's nothing left in there for U308, right? But given that the price of SWU went up this quickly, wouldn't that mean that the same is true for the SWU spots market? Like there's nothing in there. That's why it went up that much.
Yes.
Okay.
That would be a fair explanation. A reasonable explanation, I would say. So
it's a guess. So
it's a guess. Everybody's guessing here. They just happen to have a set of facts here that sort of fit the circumstances of events. So either way, they're not going to come to the table. They're not going to be really majorly, like I said, they're not going to be contracting big time for how much U308 they need, how much conversion they need as well. That's another one. Because until they know what that figure is going to be, which let's just say is available in 4 to 5 years.
Do you think that's how the bull market is going to end? Like, do you think that we go into sort of an oversupply because of innovation in SWU technology?
I would say that is a fair assessment. Yes, that would be a reasonable assessment.
So we could see the same thing that we saw last time when we had a big spike and then it came down. Last time it was because of demand destruction. This time might be because of, I guess, in a way, demand destruction, just because you need less, but not the same demand. So you can have a very bullish outlook on nuclear over the next 20, whatever, 51,000 years, whatever. But you're still maybe not going to need as much U308. Am I getting it? Or
yes, that would be once you have it depends on the amount of SWU that comes online. Yes, that is the case. That is why that's critically important for not only mine CEOs to know, but also investors. It's important for everybody to know.
Of course.
Because let's say you're a mine and a mine CEO. You don't necessarily want to be flooding the market with cheap pounds, because or flooding the market with pounds that are eventually just going to be cheap. That you are, let's just say, let's say you had a 5-year, you had a contract for 5 years, and it's at such a high price, but then your next 5 years is going to be at a lower price because demand's going to go way down for U308. Well, you need to be aware of that. Investors need to be aware of that, because if they have a greater understanding of how much SWU capacity is going to come online, then they can basically figure out, well, how much uranium are we going to need? Okay, so you'll have Cigar Lake, they're going to produce some. You're going to have, so all of Cameco's mines are going to produce some. You'll know what capacity is, and then you'll know what additional capacity is going to be needed. So if you know that a certain mine, it may be the best discovery in the world, but it could be surplus to requirement. And that becomes an issue of like, well, does that mine actually get developed? So it may not.
But that sounds more like a more longer term issue, or more something longer term to think about. Because if we, meanwhile, shorter, let's call it medium term. I guess it's fair to say 3 to 5 years. Enrichers will have to be overfeeding, and that's going to be causing more demand than originally planned.
Yes.
Right. So in that medium term, pretty much whatever you do, lest a big nuclear accident or attack, whatever, it's going to be very bullish uranium.
Even then, it's still going to be very bullish uranium,
because you got to get it right. Yeah, you got to get
it. Because you have a set capacity of 27.1 million SWU in the OECD right now. OECD countries, that what is available to OECD countries. We haven't even factored in, by the way, Japan restarts. So that's a big one. Or Germany finding sense. That's another big one. But you also now have Western fuel fabricators that are now that will now be supplying fuel for these Soviet era VVER reactors in Eastern Europe. So that's even more demand. So yeah, essentially, there's a bull market. It's probably bigger than anyone, I think even the most optimistic bulls even thought that it would be, because of this. Now, how long that lasts is where I'm trying to come in and say, like, okay, well, there's going to be SWU capacity that we're going to build out. So for an investor, what you might want to be thinking about is, we're going to have a whole bunch of capacity, or a whole bunch of demand needs over the next, say, 5 to 7 years. Where do I want to be putting my money? Producers. So like when I go back to say, like, the importance of proven reserves, on my Substack, it's like, I love ending like lines like, hey, this is proven reserves. This is why it's so important, because then that, if it's proven, you have a greater certainty that you will be able to actually economically mine that and ergo deliver it. This is why I'm incredibly bullish on Cameco. And which you wouldn't necessarily have been bullish about before this, because you think all your money is going to be made in these in new discoveries that will then become mines, but probably not. The money that will be made here is going to be in producers, in my opinion. You may eventually have some new exploration that and make some new discoveries that may be needed, may not be needed. Who knows? Okay, everything is kind of all a little bit up in the air at the moment, because again, until we know, we will actually not know how much demand is required for conversion for mined U308 until we know how much SWU capacity that we are going to have.
But so the message is, if as an investor, you want to be in company. Now you're saying producers, but would you also mean companies that are going to be producers in that time span? So
Yeah.
Okay. So
So we're
because
talking.
I think those companies have a lot of upside. Companies that are
Oh,
now valued as development plays, but then all of a sudden they become cash flow positive and they get a lot of demand for their products. They're selling at higher prices. And now they're making a lot of money. So I think the valuation would make more. The valuation delta would make more sense there.
for like a developer near-term producer. So
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
talking like
yeah. The
we're talking like
pre-production sweet spot. Yeah,
yeah, like maybe global NXE's timeline maybe gets sped up a bit. Bannerman. Probably gets sped up a bit.
boss.
Boss. Well, Boss is I mean, they have a mine. I mean,
Yeah,
they're ready to go. So and there is going to definitely be a spike in the U308 price. How much it goes to, I don't know. But the people that are going to be able to take advantage of that are going to be producers.